The Siege of Vienna, 1529, when the Ottoman Empire nearly conquered Europe. Imagine if the most powerful empire on earth assembled 250,000 warriors and marched them to the very heart of Europe, coming within hours of breaking through the last line of defense that stood between them and total conquest of Christendom. Welcome to Ancient Battlefield. Today we're exploring the most terrifying moment in European history, when Suleiman the Magnificent's massive Ottoman army reached the gates of Vienna and came closer than any Islamic force had ever come to conquering the entire continent. By 1529, the Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent was at the absolute peak of its power. The Ottomans controlled the Balkans, Hungary, most of the Middle East, and North Africa. They possessed the most advanced military technology of the age, including massive siege cannons that had proven unstoppable against every fortress they encountered. But here's what's truly shocking. Vienna was all that stood between this juggernaut and the complete conquest of Europe. The road to Vienna began with the catastrophic Battle of Mohacs in 1526, where the Ottomans had completely destroyed the Hungarian army and captured most of the kingdom. King Louis II of Hungary died in the battle, leaving a power vacuum that Suleiman was eager to exploit. What happened next will blow your mind. The Sultan decided to march directly on Vienna, the capital of the Holy Roman Empire itself. Suleiman's army that advanced on Vienna was unlike anything Europe had ever faced. Over 250,000 warriors marched under the Ottoman banners, Janissary elite troops, Turkish cavalry, Hungarian allies, and contingents from across the empire. They brought with them hundreds of cannons, including massive siege guns that had battered down the walls of Constantinople and Belgrade. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, who should have been organizing the defense of his capital, was distracted by wars with France and couldn't personally lead the resistance. The defense of Vienna fell to a small garrison of perhaps 16,000 men under Count Nicholas Graf Salm, a veteran commander who understood he was facing impossible odds. The city of Vienna in 1529 wasn't the massive metropolis we know today. It was a relatively small medieval city surrounded by walls that hadn't been seriously tested by modern siege warfare. The defenders knew their fortifications were outdated compared to the massive Ottoman cannons approaching their gates. Can you imagine the terror of the citizens as they watched the horizon darken with the largest army in the world? The Ottoman siege began on September 27, 1529, with the familiar pattern of massive bombardment designed to breach the city walls. Suleiman's great cannons began their methodical destruction of Vienna's defenses, while Turkish engineers dug massive mines under the walls to collapse them with explosive charges. But that's not the most amazing part. The weather was about to become the defenders' most important ally. The truth is even more incredible when you consider the logistics of Suleiman's campaign. The massive Ottoman army had marched hundreds of miles through hostile territory, and the early onset of one of the harshest winters in memory began to take a devastating toll on the besiegers. Supply lines stretched back to Constantinople became unreliable, and thousands of Ottoman troops began dying from cold and disease. Count Salm and his defenders proved that courage and desperation could accomplish miracles. Every night they worked frantically to repair the damage done by Ottoman cannons during the day. When Turkish miners exploded charges under the walls, Austrian troops rushed to fill the breaches with whatever materials they could find. Here's where it gets really interesting. The defenders began using captured Ottoman cannons against their former owners. The crisis came in mid-October when Ottoman sappers successfully detonated a massive mine under Vienna's walls, creating a breach large enough for thousands of troops to pour through. Suleiman ordered a general assault, and for several hours it seemed like the city would fall to the greatest military force of the age. What happened next will blow your mind. The defenders held the breach through sheer determination and fighting skill. But that's not the most amazing part. Just as Ottoman victory seemed certain, Suleiman made a decision that would change the course of world history. Faced with the approaching winter, supply shortages, and unexpectedly fierce resistance, the Sultan ordered his army to retreat. The sight of the Ottoman host withdrawing from Vienna was almost unbelievable to the defenders who had expected to die fighting. The truth is even more incredible than the immediate military outcome suggests. The failure to capture Vienna marked the high water mark of Ottoman expansion into Europe. Never again would the empire come so close to conquering the continent, and the psychological impact of the Ottoman retreat gave new hope to European resistance. Here's where it gets really interesting from a strategic perspective. The Siege of Vienna 1529 proved that even the most powerful military force could be stopped by determined defenders, harsh weather, and overextended supply lines. Suleiman had learned the same lesson that would later doom Napoleon and Hitler, that logistics matter more than battlefield prowess in extended campaigns. The human cost of the siege was enormous on both sides. Thousands of Ottoman troops died during the retreat through hostile territory, while Vienna's population had been reduced to near starvation by the time the siege ended. The city's walls were in ruins, and much of the surrounding countryside had been devastated by the massive armies. But that's not the most amazing part. The successful defense of Vienna in 1529 gave Europe crucial time to reorganize and modernize its military forces. The knowledge that the Ottomans could be stopped inspired defensive alliances and military reforms that would eventually push back the Turkish tide. Can you imagine how different world history would have been if Vienna had fallen in 1529? The Ottoman Empire might have conquered Germany, France, and eventually all of Europe. Christianity might have been replaced by Islam across the continent, and the entire development of Western civilization would have followed a completely different path. The Siege of Vienna, 1529. When the Ottoman Empire nearly conquered Europe, stands as one of history's most crucial defensive victories, proving that sometimes the fate of entire civilizations can depend on the courage of a small garrison facing impossible odds. It showed that even the mightiest empires have limits, and that determination and favorable circumstances can overcome seemingly overwhelming force. Today, as we study asymmetric warfare and the importance of logistics in military campaigns, we can learn from both Suleiman's overreach and Vienna's miraculous defense that sometimes the greatest victories come not from conquest, but from simply surviving long enough for your enemy to defeat himself. What do you think was the most crucial factor in Vienna's survival against impossible odds? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more pivotal moments from ancient battlefields.